They tell me you're over there somewhere. There you are. Thank you, Mr. President. Be not afraid. These were the first words at the first public address of the first Polish Pope after his election in October 1978. They were the words that would come to define Pope John Paul II. Words that would change the world. John Paul brought the message here to Warsaw in his first trip back home as Pope in June of 1979. It was a message about the power of faith, the power of resilience, the power of the people. In the face of a cruel and brutal system of government, it was a message that helped end the Soviet repression in the Central Land and Eastern Europe 30 years ago. It was a message that will overcome the cruelty and brutality of this unjust war. When Pope John Paul brought that message in 1979, the Soviet Union ruled with an iron fist behind an iron curtain. Then a year later, the Solidarity movement took hold in Poland. While I know he couldn't be here tonight, we're all grateful in America and around the world for Lech Walesa. Reminds me of that phrase of philosopher Kierkegaard. Faith sees best in the dark. And they were dark moments. 10 years later, the Soviet Union collapsed, and Poland and Central and Eastern Europe would soon be free. Nothing about that battle for freedom was simple or easy. It was a long, painful slog, fought over not days and months, but years and decades. But we emerged anew in the great battle for freedom, a battle between democracy and autocracy, between liberty and repression, between a rules-based order and one governed by brute force. In this battle, we need to be clear-eyed. This battle will not be won in days or months either. We need to steel ourselves for the long fight ahead. Mr. President, Mr. Prime Minister, Mr. Mayor, members of the Parliament, distinguished guests, and the people of Poland, and I suspect some people of Ukraine that are here. We are gathered here at the Royal Castle in this city that holds a sacred place in the history of not only of Europe, but humankind's unending search for freedom. For generations, Warsaw has stood where liberty has been challenged and liberty has prevailed. In fact, it was here in Warsaw when a young refugee who fled her home country from Czechoslovakia was under Soviet domination came back to speak and stand in solidarity with dissidents. Her name was Madeleine Koble Albright. She became one of the most ardent supporters of democracy in the world. She was a friend with whom I served, America's first woman Secretary of State. She passed away 3 days ago. She fought her whole life for essential democratic principles. And now, in the perennial struggle for democracy and freedom, Ukraine and its people are on the front lines, fighting to save their nation. And their brave resistance is part of a larger fight for an essential democratic principles that unite all free people. The rule of law, fair and free elections, the freedom to speak, to write and to assemble, the freedom to worship as one chooses, freedom of the press. These principles are essential in a free society. But they have They've always been under siege. They've always been embattled. Every generation has had to defeat democracy's moral foes. That's the way of the world. For the world is imperfect, as we know, where the appetites and ambitions of a few forever seek to dominate the lives and liberty of many. My message to the people of Ukraine is a message I delivered today to Ukraine's foreign minister and defense minister, who I believe are here tonight. We stand with you. Period. Today's fighting Kyiv and Melitopol and Kharkiv are the latest battle in a long struggle. Hungary, 1956. Poland, 1956, and then again, 1981. Czechoslovakia, 1968. Soviet tanks crushed democratic uprisings. But the resistance continued until finally, in 1989, the Berlin Wall and all the walls of Soviet domination, they fell. They fell. And the people prevailed. But the battle for democracy could not conclude and did not conclude with the end of the Cold War. Over the last 30 years, the forces of autocracy have revived all across the globe. Its hallmarks are familiar ones: contempt for the rule of law, contempt for democratic freedom, contempt for the truth itself. Today, Russia has strangled democracy, has sought to do so elsewhere, not only in its homeland. Under false claims of ethnic solidarity, it has invalidated neighboring nations. Putin has the gall to say he's denazifying Ukraine. It's a lie. It's just cynical. He knows that. And it's also obscene. President Zelensky was democratically elected. He's Jewish. His father's family was wiped out in the Nazi Holocaust. And Putin has the audacity, like all our autocrats before him, to believe that might will make right. My own country, a former president named Abraham Lincoln, voiced the opposing spirit to save our union in the midst of a civil war. He said, "Let us have faith that right makes might." Right makes might. Today, let us have that faith again. Let us resolve to put the strength of democracies into action to thwart the designs of autocracy. Let us remember that the test of this moment is the test of all time. The Kremlin wants to portray NATO enlargement as an imperial project aimed at destabilizing Russia. Nothing is further from the truth. NATO is a defensive alliance. It has never sought the demise of Russia. In the lead up to the current crisis, the United States and NATO worked for months to engage Russia to avert war. I met with them in person, talked to them many times on the phone. Time and again, we offered real diplomacy and concrete proposals to strengthen European security, enhance transparency, build confidence on all sides. But Putin and Russia met each of the proposals with disinterest in any negotiation, with lies and ultimatums. Russia was bent on violence from the start. I know not all of you believed me and us when we kept saying, they are going to cross the border, they are going to attack. Repeatedly, he asserted we had no interest in war, guaranteed he would not move. Repeatedly saying he would not invade Ukraine. Repeatedly saying Russian troops along the border were there for training, all 180,000 of them. There's simply no justification or provocation for Russia's choice of war. It's an example, one of the oldest human impulses, using brute force and disinformation to satisfy a craving for absolute power and control. It's nothing less than a direct challenge to the rule-based international order established since the end of World War II. And it threatens to return to decades of war that ravaged Europe before the international rule-based order was put in place. We cannot go back to that. We cannot. The gravity of the threat is why the response of the West has been so swift and so powerful and so unified, unprecedented and overwhelming. Swift and punishing cost are the only things that are going to get Russia to change its course. Within days of his invasion, the West has moved jointly with sanctions to damage Russia's economy. Russia's central bank is now blocked from global financial system, denying Kremlin's access to the war fund that's stashed around the globe. We've aimed at the heart of Russia's economy by stopping the imports of Russian energy to the United States. To date, the United States has sanctioned 140 Russian oligarchs and their family members, seizing their ill-begotten gains, their yachts, their luxury apartments, their mansions. We've sanctioned more than 400 Russian government officials, including key architects of this war. These officials and oligarchs have reaped enormous benefit from the corruption connected to the Kremlin. And now they have to share in the pain. The private sector is acting as well. Over 400 private multinational companies have pulled out of doing business in Russia, left Russia completely, from oil companies to McDonald's. As a result of these unprecedented sanctions, the ruble almost is immediately reduced to rubble. The Russian economy, that's true, by the way, takes about 200 rubles to equal $1. The economy is on track to be cut in half in the coming years. It was ranked, Russia's economy was ranked the 11th biggest economy in the world before this invasion. It will soon not even rank among the top 20 in the world. Taken together, these economic sanctions are a new kind of economic statecraft with the power to inflict damage that rivals military might. These international sanctions are sapping Russian strength, its ability to replenish its military, and its ability to project power. And it is Putin, it is Vladimir Putin who is to blame, period. At the same time, alongside these economic sanctions, the Western world has come together to provide for the people of Ukraine with incredible levels of military, economic, humanitarian assistance. In the years before the invasion, we, America, had sent over $650 million before they crossed the border in weapons to Ukraine, including anti-air and anti-armor equipment. Since the invasion, America has committed another $1.35 billion in weapons and ammunition. And thanks to the courage and bravery of the Ukrainian people, the equipment we've sent and our colleagues have sent have been used to devastating effect to defend Ukrainian land and airspace. Our allies and partners have stepped up as well. But as I've made clear, American forces are in Europe, not in Europe, to engage in conflict with Russian forces. American forces are here to defend NATO allies. Yesterday I met with the troops that are serving alongside our Polish allies to bolster NATO's frontline defenses. The reason we want to make clear is their movement on Ukraine don't even think about moving on one single inch of NATO territory. We have sacred obligation. We have a sacred obligation under Article 5 to defend each and every inch of NATO territory with the full force of our collective power. And earlier today, I visited your national stadium where thousands of Ukrainian refugees are now trying to answer the toughest questions a human can ask. My God, what's going to happen to me? What's going to happen to my family? I saw tears in many of the mothers' eyes as I embraced them. They're young children. They're young children, not sure whether to smile or cry. One little girl said, "Mr. President," she spoke a little English, "if my brother and my daddy, are they going to be okay? Will I see them again?" Without their husbands, their fathers, in many cases their brothers and sisters who stayed back to fight for their country. I didn't have to speak the language or understand the language to feel the emotion in their eyes where they grip my hand. The little kids hung onto my leg, praying with a desperate hope that all of this is temporary. Apprehension that they may be perhaps forever away from their homes. Almost a debilitating sadness that this is happening all over again. But I was also struck by the generosity of the people of Warsaw, for that matter, all the Polish people, for the depths of their compassion, their willingness to reach out, for opening their hearts. Say to the mayor and the premier, they're opening their hearts and their homes simply to help. I also want to thank my friend, the great American chef, Jose Andres, and his team for help feeding those who are yearning to be free. But helping these refugees is not something Poland or any other nation should carry alone. All the world democracies have a responsibility to help, all of them. And the people of Ukraine can count on the United States to meet its responsibility. I've announced 2 days ago we will welcome 100,000 Ukrainian refugees. We already have 8,000 a week coming to the United States of other nationalities. We'll provide nearly $300 million in humanitarian assistance, providing tens of thousands of tons of food, water, medicine, and other basic supplies. In Brussels, I announced the United States is prepared to provide more than $1 billion in additional humanitarian aid. The World Food Program told us that despite significant obstacles, at least some relief is getting to major cities in Ukraine, but not Mariupol, because Russian forces are blocking relief supplies. But we'll not cease our efforts to get humanitarian relief wherever it is needed in Ukraine and for the people who have made it out of Ukraine. Notwithstanding the brutality of Vladimir Putin, let there be no doubt that this war has already been a strategic failure for Russia already. Having lost children myself, I know that's no solace to the people who've lost family. But he, Putin, thought Ukrainians would roll over and not fight. Not much of a student of history. Instead, Russian forces have met their match with brave and stiff Ukrainian resistance. Rather than breaking Ukrainian resolve, Russia's brutal tactics have strengthened the resolve. Rather than driving NATO apart, the West is now stronger and more united than it has ever been. Russia wanted less of a NATO presence on his border, but now he has a stronger presence, a larger presence, with over 100,000 American troops here, along with all the other members of NATO. In fact, Russia has managed to cause something I'm sure he never intended. The democracies of the world are revitalized with purpose and unity found in months that we'd once taken years to accomplish. It's not only Russia's actions in Ukraine that are reminding us of democracy's blessing. It's our own country, his own country, the Kremlin. It's jailing protesters. 200,000 people have allegedly already left. There's a brain drain leaving Russia, shutting down independent news. State media is all propaganda, blocking the image of civilian targets, mass graves, starvation tactics of the Russian forces in Ukraine. Is it any wonder, as I said, that 200,000 Russians have already left their country in 1 month? A remarkable brain drain in such a short period of time. Which brings me to my message to the Russian people. I've worked with Russian leaders for decades. I sat across the negotiating table going all the way back to Soviet Premier Alexei Kosygin to talk arms control at the height of the Cold War. I've always spoken directly and honestly to you, the Russian people. Let me say this, if you're able to listen. You, the Russian people, are not our enemy. I refuse to believe that you welcome the killing of innocent children and grandparents, or that you accept hospitals, schools, maternity wards, and for God's sake, being pummeled with Russian missiles and bombs, or cities being surrounded so that civilians cannot flee, supplies cut off, and attempting to starve Ukrainians into submission. Millions of families are being driven from their homes, including half of all Ukraine's children. These are not the actions of a great nation. Of all people, you, the Russian people, as well as all people across Europe, still have the memory of being in a similar situation in the late 30s and 40s. Situation in World War II, still fresh in the minds of many grandparents in the region. Whatever your generation experienced, whether it experienced the siege of Leningrad or heard about it from your parents and grandparents, train stations overflowing with terrified families fleeing their homes, nights sheltering in basements and cellars, mornings sitting through the rubble in your homes. These are not memories of the past, not anymore, because it's exactly what the Russian army is doing in Ukraine right now. March 26, 2022, just days before you were a 21st century nation with hopes and dreams that people all over the world have for themselves and their family. Now, Vladimir Putin's aggression have cut you, the Russian people, off from the rest of the world. And it's taking Russia back to the 19th century. This is not who you are. This is not the future you deserve for your families and your children. I'm telling you the truth. This war is not worthy of you, the Russian people. Putin can and must end this war. The American people will stand with you and the brave citizens of Ukraine who want peace. My message to the rest of Europe, this new battle for freedom has already made a few things crystal clear. First, Europe must end its dependence on Russian fossil fuels, and we, the United States, will help. That's why just yesterday in Brussels, I announced a plan with the President of the European Commission to get Europe through the immediate energy crisis. Over the long term, as a matter of economic security and national security for the survivability of the planet, we all need to move as quickly as possible to clean, renewable energy. And we'll work together to help get that done so that the days of any nation being subject to the whims of a tyrant for its energy needs are over. They must end. They must end. And second, we have to fight the corruption coming from the Kremlin to give the Russian people a fair chance. And finally, most urgently, we maintain absolute unity. We must among the world's democracies. It's not enough to speak with rhetorical flourish of ennobling words of democracy, of freedom, equality, and liberty. All of us, including here in Poland, must do the hard work of democracy each and every day. My country as well. That's why I came to Europe again this week with a clear and determined message for NATO, for the G7, for the European Union, for all freedom-loving nations. We must commit now to be in this fight for the long haul. We must remain unified today and tomorrow and the day after, and for the years and decades to come. It will not be easy. There will be cost, but it's a price we have to pay, because the darkness that drives autocracy is ultimately no match for the flame of liberty that lights the souls of free people everywhere. Time and again, history shows that it's from the darkest moments that the greatest progress follows. And history shows this is the task of our time, the task of this generation. Let's remember the hammer blow that brought down the Berlin Wall. The might that lifted the Iron Curtain were not the words of a single leader. It was the people of Europe who for decades fought to free themselves. Their sheer bravery opened the border between Austria and Hungary for the pan-European picnic. They joined hands for the Baltic Way. They stood for solidarity here in Poland. And together, It was an unmistakable and undeniable force of the people that the Soviet Union could not withstand. And we're seeing it once again today with the brave Ukrainian people showing that their power of many is greater than the will of any one dictator. So in this hour, let the words of Pope John Paul burn as brightly today. Never, ever give up hope. Never doubt. Never tire. Never become discouraged. Be not afraid. A dictator bent on rebuilding an empire will never erase a people's love for liberty. Brutality will never grind down their will to be free. Ukraine will never be a victory for Russia, for free people refused to live in a world of hopelessness and darkness. We will have a different future, a brighter future, rooted in democracy and principles, hope and light, of decency and dignity, of freedom and possibilities. For God's sake, this man cannot remain in power. God bless you all, and may God defend our freedom, and may God protect our troops. Thank you for your patience. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And there you have President Biden speaking at the Royal Castle in Warsaw, a speech that had the feel of a speech that he had been preparing to give for his half-century in public office. There you heard at the very end a message about Vladimir Putin saying that this man cannot remain in power. Quite a statement, his message to Ukraine. We stand with you, period. And he put this fight into much broader terms. Almost apocalyptic terms, talking about this being a fight between freedom and democracy on one hand and tyranny on the other side. He said, the test of this moment is the test of all time. There in Warsaw, traveling with the president, is our chief White House correspondent, Cecilia Vega. The White House billed this, Cecilia, as a major address. It sure had the feel of perhaps the most important speech we've heard from President Biden.
Despite the fact that Ukraine... one of the most important speeches, I would venture to say, John, he has probably ever given in his political career. You're certainly right. This speech has the feeling of the president telling the world that as a world, we are at an inflection point right now, certainly here on this continent, that we are in the middle of history at a very dangerous point in history. America is ready to lead, is his message. But, John, he gave some very somber warnings here. I was struck by the number of times how much of a reality check he gave on the amount of time that this is going to take to see this conflict to an end. He told in this speech the world we have to steel ourselves for the long haul. He mentioned those sanctions, those tough sanctions that the United States and Western nations have inflicted upon Russia, these oligarchs, Putin himself. But the president said this is going to take a long time to make Russia change its course. This was a message for so many different audiences, George. The Ukrainian people certainly telling them we stand with you. Certainly a strong message to our allies, those countries that are so fearful right now, Poland in particular, this neighbor to Ukraine, that perhaps Vladimir Putin wants to expand beyond the boundaries of Ukraine. The president saying we will defend you. And certainly, John, a message to Vladimir Putin himself, perhaps the harshest line that this president issued. Do not even think about moving in 1 inch of NATO territory, saying that he will pay for that if that happens.
It's to say there's so much symbolism about where the president is at this moment. He's at the Royal Castle in Warsaw. That is a building that was reduced to rubble by the Nazis in World War II and remained in rubble for decades before it was finally rebuilt. Really a symbol both of aggression and tyranny, but also of Polish resilience. Tell us about who is there. I see the crowd behind you. Who came to hear the president in person there in Warsaw?
Yeah, John, I have to tell you, I am just so personally and as a journalist moved by the people who are here in this crowd right now. There's a little girl right over to my shoulder. You can't see her, but I'll tell you about her. She's probably 5 or 6 years old, and she has been holding an American flag in one hand and a Ukrainian flag in the other. There are Ukrainian refugees here in this audience today. There are certainly Polish dignitaries and diplomats from both countries, but there are a lot of Ukrainian families in this audience who came here to hear the president, and that was part of his message directly to them today. And you know, John, before he came here to give this speech, he was actually visiting in person with refugees. This is something that the president had said he wanted to do in this crisis, on this trip, certainly to come face to face with the horrible humanitarian crisis that is happening as a result of this war. Poland taking in 2 million refugees, their president saying that they are guests in this country. And that was one of the biggest applause lines here when President Biden referenced the fact that Poland has been such a welcoming country to these Ukrainian refugees. But the President Biden holding a little girl actually in his hand in that visit with refugees today. And he said right here he could feel this desperation, this hope from these people that this is just a temporary move for them.
Thank you, Cecilia Vega, Chief White House Correspondent. Thank you for that. We're going to go now to the city of Lviv, just 40 miles from the Polish border and not far from where President Biden was earlier, as you heard Cecilia mention, visiting with refugees. Our Terry Moran is there. And Terry, you've witnessed missile strikes, presumed Russian missile strikes there in the outskirts of Lviv. Again, just 40 miles from the Polish border, a city that is a hub for refugees and has been largely spared from the Russian bombardment. Tell us what you know about those strikes.
That's it exactly. This is a city which is a hub for the humanitarian efforts. I was here just before the war. Coming back, it feels like the city doubled in size. They've taken in hundreds of thousands of people, and you can feel it here. It's also a hub of diplomatic activity, and it's part, this whole region, part of the resupply out of Poland. All that weaponry that NATO and the United States leading the way, providing for the Ukrainian military, all that's coming through here. And today, this dramatic escalation in the violence here. First, a little bit before 5 p.m. local time, just about a mile or so to the north of us here. 3 missile strikes, followed by an enormous fire and great big black billowing clouds of smoke blowing over that part of the city. The mayor of the city confirming that a fuel depot had been hit over there. And then just a couple of hours later, just before the time that the president was scheduled to begin talking, to a mile or so south of us, 3 more missile strikes just over the hill here. And we are told it was part of a tank repair facility. Military targets both. But as you point out, this city having been mostly spared, this region having been mostly spared, well off the battlefield. There is talk about Russia being stalemated, as their forces are on the ground. But this indicates, this dramatic escalation in the violence here and the Russian attacks here indicates that they are not pausing in this war and that their designs on Ukraine remain complete. It looks like they're going perhaps all the way to the border at some point. But right now, what we're hearing from the president, it seemed to me, having covered him for a while as well, that he was linking this fight that has emerged here in Ukraine to the message that he began his campaign for president with, that there was something about liberalism, about democracy, about freedom in the world that was under threat in our country. That was what President Biden said at the time. And he almost linked it seemed to me, in this speech about the battle in Ukraine also being part of the test of our times, as he said. John.
And Terry, something especially ominous about that missile strike happening so close, just tens of miles away from where Biden was not long ago, and so close to the Polish border. You covered the White House, a president being so close to a missile strike from a foreign power. Really unprecedented.
Only one American president. Only one president, American president, ever came under fire on the battlefield, and that was Abraham Lincoln when the Civil War came close to Washington. He went out to take a look at it and was fired upon. But this was pretty close to where the president was, and certainly in this city, this is now encircling this city. You could sense on the streets. I was in town, as thousands of people were. Their shops are open during the course of the day. When that thundering explosion first happened in the late afternoon, it is clear that, as I say, that Russia was not just sending a message to the people of Lviv, but to the president across the border, that this war will not be stopped by sanctions or by his efforts.
All right, Terry Moran in Lviv. Please stay safe, Terry. Our coverage continues on ABC News and abcnews.com. We will have complete details on world news tonight. I'm Jonathan Karl from Washington. Have a good day.
Macedo, welcome to ABC News Live's continuing coverage of President Biden's major address there in Warsaw, Poland. The president tried to set the stakes of this war in Ukraine, framing it as more than a fight between two countries, but rather a fight between democracy and autocracy. And he made that speech again from Warsaw, Poland, a forefront of the fight against the Soviet Union in the 1980s. The president paralleled that history to where the world is now.
For generations, Warsaw has stood where liberty has been challenged and liberty has prevailed. In fact, it was here in Warsaw when a young refugee who fled her home country from Czechoslovakia, was under Soviet domination, came back to speak and stand in solidarity with dissidents. Her name was Madeleine Kobel Albright. She became one of the most ardent supporters of democracy in the world. She was a friend with whom I served, America's first woman Secretary of State. She passed away 3 days ago. She fought her whole life for essential democratic principles. And now, in the perennial struggle for democracy and freedom, Ukraine and its people are in the front lines, fighting to save their nation. And their brave resistance is part of a larger fight for an essential democratic principles that unite all free people. The rule of law, fair and free elections, the freedom to speak, to write, and to assemble, the freedom to worship as one chooses, freedom of the press. These principles are essential in a free society. But they have always been under siege. They've always been embattled. Every generation has had to defeat democracy's moral foes. That's the way of the world. For the world is imperfect, as we know, where the appetites and ambitions of a few forever seek to dominate the lives and liberty of many. My message to the people of Ukraine is a message I delivered today to Ukraine's foreign minister and defense minister, who I believe are here tonight. We stand with you, period.
The president there underscoring the role that the U.S. and that NATO will play in countering Russian aggression during this conflict. I want to bring in ABC News Chief White House Correspondent Cecilia Vega, who's there in Warsaw, and ABC News and Senior National Correspondent Terry Moran in Lviv, Ukraine, for more on this. Cecilia, before I ask you about the speech, first, what was it like just to be there in this setting in Warsaw as the president's highlighting the history there and then giving this speech for the world and highlighting the historic nature of where we are right now?
Yeah, Diane, I don't know if you can still hear and see behind me. I'm just going to look over my shoulder because the crowd is starting to leave. But there were actually women over my shoulder crying. They're holding Ukrainian flags. There were a number of Ukrainian refugees here in this audience. I was watching for most of the speech a young little girl about 5 or 6 years old who was holding a Ukrainian flag in one hand and an American flag in the other. And she was just watching the president. I mean, this was a very moving moment for the people who were here in this crowd. And I'll tell you just a quick bit about the significance of this building here behind me. This is the Royal Castle in Warsaw. This is a building that was bombed and destroyed by the Nazis, and it was rebuilt over decades by the Polish, and the White House chose this really momentous piece of history here to show the resiliency of the Polish people. He is here because he is trying to reach out, trying to show the Polish, not just the Polish citizens and the people of this country, but the world really, that America wants to lead agreed, wants to be a good ally, wants to defend NATO if in doubt it comes to it. The president certainly hitting that message strong here today that we will defend any inch of NATO territory if, in fact, Vladimir Putin decides to cross it.
And Cecilia, one of the last lines of this speech really stuck out to me. You heard President Biden talking about Vladimir Putin and saying, and I quote here, "For God's sake, this man cannot remain in power." What did you make of the president stating that so frankly, and what was the reaction there by the crowd?
Yeah, that was certainly one of the lines in the speech that elicited the biggest applause line. That and another message that I thought was directly for Vladimir Putin. It was the harshest line of the speech. Don't even think about moving in 1 inch of NATO territory. And it was almost like he slammed his fist. He used a very strong tone. Look, I think you also, though, as the president was delivering these harsh words for Putin, had to deliver this message to the world that we are in this for the long haul. We are at an inflection point in history right now, certainly for Europe on this continent that we are on right now, that they are seeing war in their backyard and in a country like Poland. The president's saying the West, the United States, has come together to issue these historic, tough sanctions against Russia, against Putin, against all of these oligarchs, against these companies. But this is going to take a really long time. The president said, we are not in this for days. We are not in this for weeks. The message to the world is you really have to steel yourselves for the long haul here. So certainly a tough message for Putin. But Diane, the reality is this isn't going to end anytime soon. No, that's the sad truth. And Terry, I want to go to you on that because I know you're in Lviv, Ukraine. There are just explosions there, so it certainly seemed like this war is not coming to an end anytime soon. What can you tell us about what's happening there now, and what's the reaction been in Ukraine to the support from the U.S. and the West so far?
Well, you can see it in the people who are in Poland at the president's speech. There is great appreciation for the support of the United States here. And today, here in Lviv, in the western part of Ukraine, far removed from the main battlefields, a part of Ukraine that was for the most part spared. This city had one attack today in what must be considered an unmistakable message to President Biden in his visit just across the border. 2 major strikes. First, a little bit before 5 p.m. local time, just about a mile to the north of us here. 3 loud explosions. I was in town and could hear them, and then instant later saw this fire and billowing smoke, huge clouds of smoke still kind of blowing across the night sky here. Fuel depots were hit, we're told by the mayor. And that was the first strike. And then 2 hours later, just before President Biden was scheduled to speak, 3 more missiles struck about a mile to the south, and we're told that that was at tank repair facilities. The war coming to Lviv in a very, very dramatic way. A message to the people of Lviv and to President Biden and others that while Russia has had its problems on the battlefield, it is far from finishing what President Putin wants to do here as he said, denazify Ukraine, meaning overthrow the government. An elected, Democratic elected Jewish president, so it's a bit of an absurd claim, but very ambitious claims on this territory. And here, by bringing the war here today in this way, is a clear message that Putin, whatever President Biden says, is continuing to push. He's not going to back down.
Yeah, we heard President Biden just now calling those claims of denazification obscene, in his words, Terry. We also have heard that the Russian forces are entering a defensive position. What exactly does that mean, and what is the latest on the fighting?
Well, the Pentagon, which has been observing, and as the UK military as well, has seen the Russians advance stalled now for a long time, but now actually having been pushed back in a couple of places around Kyiv, they are digging in, entrenching, in order to perhaps resupply. They've had terrible logistics problems, and in place major artillery, bring up the kind of brute force that has characterized the Russian way of war, not just here, but in Chechnya in the 1990s, in Syria in the 2010s, just obliterate things. We've seen that in Mariupol and Kharkiv, in these other cities, perhaps bringing that kind of force to bear in Kyiv. But right now, they're stretched pretty thin. And what the Pentagon is saying, and others, is that they are taking up defensive positions. That could be just a pause, though. There is some change in the tone from the Russian military. They say their main designs are on the east, that eastern part of Ukraine where Russian-backed, Russian-armed proxy separatists have been fighting for 8 years. And that seemed to be a lessening of the goals for the Russian military in this country. But look, they're here. They aren't going anywhere. And while Ukraine has put up a spirited and extremely skilled fight on the defense, there's a long way to go. And that was the president's main message. This is a long struggle. Everything changed when Putin sent his army into Ukraine. And we'd better get ready for it. That was what the president was saying.
And Terry, the president is heading back to the U.S. Tonight. You were traveling with him on this European trip earlier in the trip. Now you're on the ground there in Ukraine. Do you think this was a successful trip for President Biden? Did he accomplish what he set out to do?
I think it was an important trip, Diane, no question. Just as Cecilia was saying, you know, this is a moment of trauma for Europe. You can feel it. You could feel it at NATO when I was with him at NATO. A totally different tone. I'd covered NATO meetings before. Totally different tone from the leaders and a sense of almost dread in the air here and elsewhere. There go the sirens again, so we'll get in shortly. But there's no question that President Biden physically coming, linking once again the alliance together, the United States, the major partner, saying we are going to be with you and we must stand up for our values. That's something the Ukrainians want to hear. They feel they're defending their homeland, of course, but also defending Europe, defending these values that we all live by. We may have our troubles abiding by them, but they are precious to us, our way of life. This is the battlefield right now. As those sirens go off again.
Terry, I can hear those sirens myself. We're going to let you go. Stay safe, friend. Thank you. And a programming note for you, ABC News Live Prime anchor Lindsay Davis will be traveling to Poland and reporting on the latest from the region. That's going to start Monday. You can catch Lindsay at 7 p.m. Eastern right here on ABC News Live. Thank you for joining us. I'm Diane Macedo, and do stay with us as ABC News Live continues with news, context, and analysis.